Hello, family, and welcome. We're Bob and Penny Lord, and we have a very special saint to share with you today, St. John Neumann, who was the 4th Bishop of Philadelphia. And he was more like the patron of the German immigrants. As Mother Cabrini was for the Italians, St. John was for the German immigrants here in this area.
St. John Neumann was the first male a priest to, well, let's see,
He was actually the first male to be American.
First American male saint, would you say?
Right. So we're being very specific because you got Mother Cabrini, who was the first citizen of the United States, Mother Seton, who's the first born citizen who's a saint, and St. John Neumann, who is the first man, American man, to be a saint. So we have to specify these people.
When talking about our first saints of the United States, something that I'd like to mention, have been very graciously been shown around this historic city, and we've come to Pennsylvania and to Philadelphia so many times, and never taken time to smell the roses or to appreciate the flag. And this trip we have, and what we've seen is so much about how the church and the state were originally intermarried.
Now this nation, and this was the first capital of the United States, was truly founded under God. And the people that came here came for religious freedom. And so it's something that we've kind of taken for granted and we've never really delved into when we came to Philadelphia.
But so much is happening as we're traveling and as God is, I believe, guiding us to write different books, is to this point of bringing to you the fact that our ancestors came here for freedom of religion, primarily. Freedom of religion. And this is one of the things that St. John Neumann was interested in. Unless a people be taught their faith, they will lose it. And so without having German-speaking priests here, it was going to be impossible for them to keep the richness of the faith and to grow in the faith, because we need our pastors to teach us, to guide us, to bring us the sacraments. So St. John Neumann came here, and he addressed this by I believe he was responsible for constructing
80 churches and 34 schools. Now, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's go back. St. John Neumann was born in a small village in the hill country above Vienna on March 28, 1811. It was Holy Thursday of that year. When he was 5 years old, the associate pastor of the parish church allowed him to become an altar boy. This was his first step leading him towards the altar. Without consciously knowing, little John was in love with the prospect of being close to our Lord Jesus on the altar. At 12 years old in 1823, he left his hometown for the metropolis of Budweis to study with the priests there. Though he did not know it at the time, it was the beginning of his journey to America. He was a voracious reader and a very serious student. Education was very important to him.
You know, I've said very many times that we are taught, we spend how many years? About 16 years in education to become lawyers, doctors, every type of education. But the education which is the most important, the salvation of our soul and the souls of others, we give very little time. That was not with him. With him, the focus was on education.
And this was his father's. His father's goal for him also was education. He didn't mind spending as much money as he had to send John to the best schools to get him an education. He didn't want him to become a priest necessarily. That was more his mother's desire. Right. As a matter of fact, St. John, as far as we knew, at an early age, up until age 20, had no desire to become a priest.
A lot like our Pope, John Paul II.
And then when he was at age 20, where he had to make a decision what school he was going to go into, his mother suggested he apply to the seminary, School of Theology. And he said, well, there are so many requirements for that, and I'm really not interested in the subject matter. There's no way I'm going to get in there. But because his mother was inspired by the Lord, and because he loved his mother, he applied.
And he was accepted.
He was immediately accepted and immediately turned off all his other interests and just focused on theology, the seminary, and the priesthood.
That was very interesting reading about him. Once he knew that God's will was that he become a priest, he set aside his love. And his love was the sciences, the math and astronomy, the pursuit of medicine. These were the things that he wanted to do, right? His focus. But as soon as he knew God's focus, he turned his back on that world and faced the world of God.
We really believe that from the very beginning, St. John was inspired by the Lord. It's almost like he could hear voices telling him he had to come to the United States. There was such a great need for German-speaking priests here in this country. There were, in the Diocese of New York, where we first came, there were 3 German-speaking priests, a total of, I think, 105 priests, or 105 priests totally in the Diocese of New York, and only 3 German-speaking priests for tens of thousands of German immigrants. When it was determined that no priests were going to be ordained in his diocese in the year that he was ready, in 1835, ready for ordination, he wrote to bishops in the United States asking them if they would accept him as a missionary in the United States, and did not get a response. Now, instead of continuing to wait, he decided to take the bull by the horns. He forged ahead. He did get some money, enough money to get him to the United States, and so he decided to go on his own, and once he got to the United States, he would get a hold of a bishop and try to become ordained. He did not even say goodbye to his parents. He knew that that would be too painful because they didn't want him to go.
And he didn't really want to leave them. You know, it reminds us of what Teresa of Avila said. She said upon leaving her father, she had a pain as great. She remembered that the rest of her life, and she said it was like dying. So imagine, again, with St. John Neumann, who was very close to his parents, this separation was one of the greatest pains that he suffered.
And they feared, and rightfully so, that they would never see him again, because traditionally when missionaries came to this country, black robes in particular, they never did return home. They died in their mission. And so his family knew that if this happened, they would never see him again. So John wrote them a letter saying goodbye, and he told them, the reason I'm writing this is because it would be too painful to say it to you in person, but I thank you for everything you've given me throughout my life, and I do pray that I will see you again. He had such an urgency to get here that he got on board the ship, and when the ship got into the New York harbor, there were so many sick people that they were quarantined and they couldn't get off the ship. And John pestered, you know, Jesus tells us, pester my Father. John pestered the captain of the ship to the point where the captain of the ship lowered him into a rowboat. And John rowed to Staten Island, where he got a steamer to bring him to New York, and that's how he finally got to New York. But he was here. He knew he had to get here. He had a job to do. He had to become ordained. And when he was finally introduced to the Bishop of New York, Bishop Dubois, he found that he had been accepted by the Bishop of New York, but the letter had not reached him by the time he left for the United States. We're at the main altar in the Church of St. Peter the Apostle in what was Germantown in Philadelphia. This was the German church during the time of St. John Neumann. And most of his ministry before he became Bishop of Philadelphia were to the German-speaking immigrants in the United States, first in upstate New York and then in Baltimore. When he came to Philadelphia, he had to brush up on his English so he could speak in English to most of his people. But he would come here often to preach because he could preach in German, and he felt very comfortable with the people here.
St. John Neumann was a man for all seasons. He was a man, he was a pastor. And this is why he never really wanted to become a bishop. His whole meaning in life was to minister to the poor in spirit as well as the poor in body. And the way he could do it was by understanding and speaking their language. And so he was quite fluent in French and Italian and English, but of course his number one, his heart language we call it, was German. We discovered here at the shrine that there were also many Irish people who originated from Ireland who could not speak English, spoke Gaelic. And so he even self-taught himself how to speak, to understand Gaelic, and I'm sure to communicate to those who came to confession.
From the time St. John Neumann came to the United States, one of the greatest griefs was seeing the young children uneducated. And this really concerned him. And to go where
he loved education.
He loved the children. And to go where his German immigrants were, and there were no churches and no priests, there was no way to minister to them. In his first parish assignment in Buffalo, New York, he would spend 15, 18 hours a day traveling all over the area just to preach to the people. So when the Lord chose him to be the Bishop of Philadelphia, there was a cathedral that was under construction. And they truly expected that the new bishop would finish the construction, but the new bishop was more concerned about building churches, little churches, and schools for the people so that they could have priests in their parish.
And what did he say to the laity?
He said to the laity, "You build the churches and I will bring you the priests." And there was a shortage of priests at the time, tremendous shortage. They built the churches, he brought the priests.
And this was in less than 8 years. See, St. John Neumann knew, as we know, that unless you know your faith, you can't love something or someone you do not know. You cannot love them. You will not serve them. And so it is with Mother Church. So education was a very important facet, and this is why, although St. Elizabeth Seton started the first Catholic schools, St. John Neumann set up the parochial school system as we know it today. And we know today that people of all religions, all backgrounds, will send their children to Catholic schools because of the quality of education that the children receive. Little do they realize that the quality comes from a people who are dedicated, and they're dedicated to teach as Christ would teach.
There is another connection between St. John Neumann and St. Elizabeth Seton other than the parochial school system. When St. Elizabeth Seton and her ladies went to Emmitsburg, Maryland, Father Dubois, who was the founder of Mount St. Mary's Seminary, helped them tremendously to get started. Father Dubois came to New York and became Bishop Dubois of New York, the Diocese of New York, and ordained St. John Neumann.
Confession was a main part of his ministry. I believe his first love was the Eucharist.
In fact, he was the one who created a year-round 40 hours devotion. St. Philip Neri had started the 40 hours devotion in Rome, but he started it here on a year-round basis, and it was not that popular at that time, but he had such a great love for our dear Lord Jesus and the Eucharist. He loved to celebrate Mass. That was the greatest gift that he had been given. And this altar that was standing in front of was where he celebrated his last public Mass before he died.
Now, what can one man do? Bob told you that he brought about the practice of 40-hour devotion in his diocese. He brought it from St. Philip Neri, had it in Rome, and St. John Neumann brought it here to the United States. I don't think he had any great aspirations that this would spread throughout the country. He brought it to his diocese, and although his priests were not in complete accord and communion with him, he insisted and they obeyed. And there was such a reaction from the laity. You see the part that you play? There was such a reaction That 40 hours devotion then spread throughout the whole country. What can we do if we say yes?
He was not a grandiose person. He was a very simple, humble person. His predecessor, the bishop before him, was very grandiose, and the bishop who took over after he died was very, very easy to get along with the people. St. John was more of the people. He actually, at one point, he asked for the diocese to be broken up and let him have just a very small, poor diocese for himself.
He certainly would be termed the reluctant bishop. He did not seek to be bishop. He didn't feel worthy. He was truly humble, and that's what we learn about most of the saints is humility. And another asset, another virtue, is that of obedience. When he tried to get his superior to contact His Holiness the Pope and say, not to make him bishop, when the Pope returned the words and he said, "You are to be a bishop. This is my choice," he obeyed. Again, he obeyed. And interestingly enough, he was ordained a bishop on the day, the anniversary of his birth.
On his birthday. So that was a great birthday present. He was given in the year 1852 to be ordained a bishop, fourth bishop of the Diocese of Philadelphia.
At 41 years of age.
41 years old.
Bob and I like to always say that you know a founder by those who follow them. The Redemptorists are living the message of their founder, St. Alphonsus Liguori, and of the saint who is the patron saint of the shrine, St. John Neumann. St. John Neumann had a tremendous devotion to the Eucharist, to Eucharistic adoration, which we have here in the church, to the celebration of the Mass, and look at this beautiful altar, and the sacrament of penance.
And devotion to Our Lady.
Yes, but the sacrament of penance. When you look about this church, you will see all the confessionals that
there are 8 of them that I can see, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 confessionals right here in the main body of the church.
That are used till today.
At this shrine, we have masses 3 times a day down at the shrine. Confessions are heard twice a day. And at noontime, there are so many people coming to confession, they have to have 2 priests to handle the crowds. Now, Father, I've been in churches where our priests sit in the confessional and get all their reading done because nobody ever shows up. Wouldn't you feel excited if you could get all those penitents coming in to see you? This is what happens here at the shrine of St. John Neumann. Now, during the life of St. John Neumann, he was criticized for giving easy penances or being very easy on the penitents. And one time a priest came up and asked him, "Are you aware
That's
that
what they're saying.
This is what they're saying about you, that you give easy penances or you're an easy on the penitents?" And he said, "Penance is a sacrament of mercy." I would like to be able to go to confession to somebody like St. John Neumann. And I would imagine that because, based on the amount of people that do come here to confession, that his priests follow in his example. We're here with Father Donato Silveri at the Church of St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi in Philadelphia. We were so amazed when we heard that St. John Neumann had created the first Italian church in America.
Italian-American parish.
And it was here at St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi in Philadelphia.
As we've been working on the program for St. John Neumann, or Newman as we Americans know him, we discovered that he was responsible for the formation of the first Italian-American parish here in Philadelphia, and that's St. Mary Magdalene. Now, of course, none of you know that I'm of Italian descent.
Like nobody knows Mother Angelica's Italian.
So, of course, our guide, Bridget, said, oh, you feel so at home here. And I did. The minute I came into the neighborhood, I felt so at home. It reminded me of my childhood, as does this church. This is what I call a real church. And this is what we need today. We need this sign, just as you have seen that beautiful shrine to St. John Neumann. We need a shrine like this that is rooted in our roots. We're bringing you, with Mother Cabrini, we're bringing you the price that our ancestors paid. Now, of course, I take it from the Italian viewpoint because the immigrants from my country, from my people, were Italian. And my ancestors were Italian. The price they paid, the struggle and the suffering. And we must preserve it. This is part of history, people. This is part of the formation of our country. And it's time for us to return to being patriotic and religious. And we need this.
You're going to let Father.
Yeah, now, forgive me, I get very wired up. So this is Father, and he's been telling us so many exciting things I want him to share with you.
When the Bishop St. John Neumann was approached by about 600 or so Italians and said, we need our own church, he looked around and found this church in this area. So he bought the church and also the cemetery grounds that go with it. And he assigned Father Mariani, Gaetano Mariani, as the first pastor. The church continued to grow, and they ran into some difficulties, and eventually the second founding, I guess you could say, belongs to Father Antonio Isoleri. He came here, and he's the one that built this beautiful church that we have here that was dedicated by Archbishop Ryan in 1891. And this tremendous building that we have here is the church was really the work and the struggles of Father Monsignor Isoleri.
Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about roots, heritage. When you come here, and you should, you've asked us, we go all over Europe, you've asked us for shrines here in the United States, and we're giving you shrines in the United States. You must go to the shrine of St. John Neumann. It's a magnificent shrine about the history of the church in Philadelphia, the history of the church in America. And when you get here and you look at Philadelphia and you see this, which was the first capital of the United States, this is heaped in heritage. This church, St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, is heaped in the heritage of the Italian people in this country. You must come here. You must venerate this saint. You must support these parishes and these shrines. This is a shrine to St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi. It's a shrine to the Italian people. Your job is to come here and support these shrines.
We wonder, and everyone is trying to find out why there's so much violence. Do we know who we are? Have we soon forgotten who we are as a people? What has made up this beautiful country? The great people who came here before us and suffered. I think of all those Italian Americans, German Americans, Polish Americans, Irish Americans, every nationality that came here without the knowledge of this language. Like St. John Neumann, he had studied the English language, but it was certainly not easy for him to communicate in English. But he came here. I think of my ancestors coming here without a knowledge of one word of English and how they suffered, but never ever told me of their suffering. I've never heard from an Italian anything about the suffering. I had to discover it myself. We must remember who we are. We must remember what we're made up of. We must remember how this country was founded. And we must remember that it was always linked with the church. We've got to come back here to find out, some of us, who we are. Some of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren do not know who we are. We have married, Italians have married others of other ethnic backgrounds, and that's wonderful. We have become a people. But we have to remember that we're not 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. We're thousands of years old. So what we must remember is that we are part of this magnificent church. And this is when I walked in here, Bridget said, Penny, this is a church, right? Because that's what I had said when I went into the shrine of St. John Neumann, when I went into St. Peter's. I said, this is a church. And I had the same feeling. This church must remain open. You must come here and support it. And those of you in Philadelphia, have pride in this church and in your churches here and in your city.
Our little saint began feeling dizzy and tired towards the end of 1859, but he did not cut back on his major activities. He delegated public ceremonies to Associate Bishop Wood. But on the afternoon of January the 5th, 1860, while he was on his way to the post office to send a priest a chalice which had been lost, he suffered a massive heart attack on the streets of Philadelphia and died almost instantly. The people of Philadelphia came out in throngs to say goodbye to their little bishop. He was buried as he had wished in the Redemptorist Church of St. Peter in Philadelphia, where his body lays to this day. In 1963, Pope Paul VI beatified Bishop Neumann, and on June 19, 1977, he was raised to the communion of saints, the first American male to be so honored. We were honored to be at the canonization of St. John Neumann. He has been a powerful intercessor for the people of Philadelphia. They will never forget him, nor will we. Come to the shrine of St. John Neumann in Philadelphia. You owe it to yourself. We love you, family. Write us at the address on our screen or call us in the United States at 1-800-633-2484.
We love you.